Hi, this is Roger, thanks for dropping by. This sea of Dendrobiums constitutes most of what I see as a set. This probably isn't all of them, but it's the ones I can get at easily, and the principle remains the same. These come into the category of continuous growers. So in their natural environment, the best they would get as far as seasonal growth is concerned is a wet season and a dry season. There are some temperature fluctuations with some of them, and some of that is dependent on the elevation they may be found if they're species, but a fair few of these in here are hybrids. Some are primary hybrids, so you could look up their position in the world at the species level and do an average. So if you get one that comes from a very high elevation, it's going to be a cool grower, whereas if you come, one that's more in the steamy jungle environment, it's going to be a warm grower. And if you've got a hybrid between the two, all you can do really is average it and sort of say, well, if that's a warm grower, that's a cool grower, then I'll keep it intermediate. That's all you can do. As soon as you get into hybrids, you lose that specific species care. But many of the species just come into the same category of care. You don't need to go down to individual levels once your collection gets big, like what mine has done. So we'll have a look at some of these as I get them out of the way, because at the moment this video is interrupting my watering, because this is where I water, and it's the only place I've got to lay out some plants, like it en masse, so to speak. Right, the first set, which is a set of orchids that, as far as dendrobiums are concerned, are quite common in collections. Quite a lot of people would be growing these in the home, which is a different environment to me. Although this isn't a greenhouse, it's closer to a greenhouse than the house. But it is attached to the house with a flipping great door to the lounge. So I can share the environment between the two. So if it starts getting a bit nippy out here at night, so I can just leave that door open when I go to bed and share the heat prior to setting my heater up. Yeah. So it's a hybrid environment, shall we say. When the door's closed, it works like a greenhouse. So it's more that way inclined, shall we say. Right, the first three are Dendrobium phalaenopsis type hybrids. Two are no IDs, one does actually have a name. Having a name doesn't make its care any different whatsoever. Now, these have never grown well for me until this year, and for some reason, I don't know why, this year they've done much better. I think prior to that they may have stayed in their pots a bit too long and started losing some roots. I used to be a bit lazy on that front. Not so much now. So a Dendrobium phalaenopsis will typically put up anything. You can get quite compact versions of the phalaenopsis type hybrids. You can also get some giants in there. So one you buy, from a garden centre or something like that, supermarket or something, with pretty blooms on, you may get it home and the next canes grow almost twice as big, because growth inhibitors are used on this type of mass-produced plant. So they're restricted in their growth because they look more compact and tidier, are easier to pack and easier to sell. So that's the logic, but don't be surprised if your next set of growths actually get a lot bigger than your previous ones that you bought in bloom. This one, it's got an old good leaved cane. I can't remember. This one did bloom back last winter with a very poor spike of a couple of blooms, and since then it has pushed out some new growths. This cane is growing on. The cane out there is growing on, still growing, hasn't stopped yet, and there's an immature growth that probably won't mature down here because it doesn't seem to be moving. That happens sometimes. That was probably the first growth it put out after it was repotted, and it hadn't really got a root system going yet. It has now. I mean, it's got a reasonable pot full of roots, and it's still producing new ones from the base of the new growths. That tends to be their growth pattern. The new roots on the phalaenopsis type often come out after the new growth is a few inches long, rather than together, if you see what I mean. So yeah, it's coming on. And the new growths are pushing on well, so in theory when those canes get to maturity we should get some spikes. Wait and see. Good game. This is another one in the same category. I don't think this one bloomed. It hasn't done for some time. What does it say on there? Nope, wrong way round. That's the one that hasn't bloomed. This is the one that had the poor spike in the winter with white blooms, basically, virtually pure white. This is a good strong growth, and so is this. So the plant is pulling back, and the previous growth on it is pretty good. That's the one that bloomed in the winter. With the Phalaenopsis type, the first spike you get will tend to come straight out of the apex like that, straight out of the base of the terminal leaf. But a good strong plant is perfectly capable of producing secondary spikes from a bit lower down. So from, away from the apex. I mean, I've seen 3 spikes coming out of an apex before. When you've got a strong Phalaenopsis type bursting with health, it will bloom profusely, and you can get spikes from lower down. They don't only come from the apex, but that does tend to be the first spike on a growth. And just because that's bloomed on the apex, it doesn't necessarily restrict it from pushing out a spike lower down. So yeah, so that's the white one, no ID. And then this one's turning into a bit of a giant, and it's getting a bit lopsided, so this is liable to tip because it's a bit dry at the moment, needs some water. This one bloomed in the winter. This has got a name. This is Thai Angel, and the bloom spike was quite good. There may have been 2, I can't remember, but they lasted ages, and it is a lovely Dendrobium Phalaenopsis, this one. Blooms are gorgeous because they're not a plain colour. They've actually got patterning on them. They've got veining on the petals and sepals, so it is a very attractive version, hybrid. But I've got 2 strong new growths coming. It's produced a reasonable root system now as well, so it's got backup from the pot rather than just relying on feeding itself through the leaves. So that one's coming on nicely now. I've only got 3. I certainly won't be getting any more. They're not my favourites, but I'm happy to have those 3 now they've decided to grow. See, that one's trying to fall over now. Stay. Right, we've got assorted little ones here. Not all Dendrobiums are huge, right? And this is this little one that's in bloom here. This is Nora Tokunaga crossed with Aberrans. So this is a Latoria type. Quite honestly, Latoria types are one of the easiest types of Dendrobiums to grow, providing you can give them a bit of humidity. They don't tend to do so well in dry atmosphere. They'll dump their leaves, but they should keep their leaves for some considerable time, providing they've got that bit of humidity. The Latoria types have similar shaped blooms on most of them. They can be a lot larger than these, but they do have a trait where often some of the best colours and patterns are on the back of the blooms. So in this case with this one, it's best viewed from above, not from below. And that is blooming on the latest 2 growths. There's no sign of any more coming yet, but I suspect more new growths will follow after the blooming. And because these are continuous growers, they don't necessarily have a growing season. They will bloom when those canes mature. So that's that one. This is my little Rhodostictum that is not doing too well. Difficult to tell why. I mean, it might like it a little cooler than some of the other Latoria types. Perhaps it grows in higher places. And with the heat wave we've had this year, it's certainly got a couple of the older leaves. This is the latest. This is the latest growth. I was about to say I expect this to bloom soon, and there is a spike. So this one is going to bloom. First growth on my little plant, because it is quite a young plant that's produced 3 leaves instead of the normal 2, and occasionally 1. So yeah, we've got a spike on that one, coming soon. What else have we got? This is, again, the heat got some of the older leaves, but it's produced quite a few new growths. So that one's not bad. What's this one called? This is Macrophyllum variety God knows what that says, and that's my writing. Turnertensi, I think that says. Probably. This one hasn't bloomed for me. This is one that came out of the big box, I believe. If you want to know what the big box is all about, you'll have to look at the old videos. Anyway, that one's coming on nicely. There's no reason why some of these latest growths shouldn't bloom. It is a compact plant, this one. It's never going to be a giant. So, as I say, not all Dendrobiums are giants. There are some miniatures in amongst them. So that's that one. That's this little one that's mounted. I think this came out of the big box as well. And this is Tetragonum. You can see from this that all the canes were of a similar size, shall we say, but one of the latest ones is almost twice as long. But I would suggest that probably is about the size it's going to get. I don't know for sure. I haven't done my homework on that one. But again, if that cane's as good as it's going to grow, then it would be probably its first mature cane that's capable of blooming. But that's a wait and see on that one. But given that it's a Tetragonum, it's in this set at the moment until proven otherwise. And this one doesn't live in a set yet because I haven't got a flipping clue what it is. Because it's got a hybrid name that has no reference whatsoever back towards its original two parents, the two species, I don't know. And to all intents and purposes, this came out of the big box and I didn't give it any hope at all. I thought, you're not going to make it. You got no roots worth talking about, and a leafless bulb and one a bit bigger, you're probably a seedling. But it has produced a nice new growth now that's pushing on nicely with good sized leaves. Yeah. And the impression I get now is that this was a young growth. So this will be the next size growth. How big this plant's going to get, I really don't know. It's Jarrac Firethorn Brownie. That doesn't give you a flipping clue, does it? So anyway, that one's just sort of lurking, and at the moment that's staying in the continuous grower set until I can find out a bit more from it. Right, we're getting on to the bigger stuff now. Right, let's go then. This one lost quite a few leaves this year. That could be natural. Yes, I don't know. But this is Roy Tokunaga White Knight. And I've got a feeling this one has bloomed for me. I think these are my old spikes. But if you look at this one, I think this is the latest growth. And that is probably too much light, which was difficult to control this year. Trying to get a balance between stopping the heat getting in with shade netting and reducing the light too much. It was not an easy balance this year. Several what I would call older useless canes, because once the cane on a Dendrobium starts looking like that, it serves no purpose. It could easily be just cut off at the base, but it also does no real harm because it's shriveled. You have to bear in mind with Dendrobiums, they all come from a base. They grow out from a base, and the roots share the base. And what the plant tries to do is the nutrients and hydration that come in through the roots, it tries to balance throughout the whole plant. So some of that is going into the old canes. They work as backup. You know, in harsh times or root loss or anything like that, those canes are a storage organ. They store stuff away. But there comes a time when there's just too many of them. And what's happening is it's doing too much sharing, and too much of the good stuff's going into the older canes. And if you've got predominantly older canes and only one or two new ones, you could be starving those new ones by keeping the plant with all those old useless canes on. But as I said, once they get like that, the chances are they're storing nothing. Yeah, I mean, that one's actually, I can squeeze it. So certainly those three could come off and not do any harm to the plant whatsoever. So that's that one. Oh, running out of room here. This one grows incredibly well for me. This has put out so many new growths this year, but that's a new growth. It dumped its leaves. So at some point this plant decided it couldn't support the amount of growth it had on it, and it decided to dump some newer leaves and still maintain some of the old ones. I think it got confused. And again, that was probably the intense heat and light that it got. But there's quite a few spikes coming on this one. What have we got? One here, one on that growth, the little one starting there, and another one there. And the largest of the new growths that consequently got too close to the light. It stuck its head up above the shade. And this is this is a primary cross, Polysema cross with Aberrans. Aberrans will turn up in primary crosses and hybrids frequently in the Latoria types. It's like one of the base ones that are used frequently. Oh, that's a surprise. That really old cane has also got a spike. Well, it looks like a spike. These don't tend to have kikis, so I'm not quite sure what that cane's doing. Because looking at the size of the spikes, what's that? It's like at least twice as thick. I should keep my eye on that. That could do something unusual. Anyway, that's that one. That will be in bloom down the line. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 spikes and that. Oh no, 6. I missed that one. 6 spikes and that. So that one's coming up nicely. Grows well for me, that one. Now what the hell's this one? This is Alexandrae. I'm not sure this one's bloomed for me yet. Probably this, again, you can see the progression. This was obviously a seedling. Tiny little bulbs, gradually progressing and making its way across the pot. An aborted new growth there, which I started to get incredibly worried about. I thought, oh, goodness me, what's going wrong with you? Polite version. That's not actually what I thought. But following on from there, it pushed up this growth, which is quite a bit bigger than anything it's had before. That still doesn't mean that's its full height, but it's more likely to be representative of, future growths. I see no reason why this shouldn't bloom, but we shall see. Right, and the last one out on the table at the moment, and probably the last one for this video because I really do need to crack on. This is my only antelope type Dendrobium. It's called black antelope. And doing a bit of work on the internet, the colour of the blooms is the deepest purple, almost black. If I ever see any, because so far I haven't. This plant had 2 new growths when I got it, and they rocketed away. But this one had a problem back in the summer in the heat. It wasn't at all happy. I had quite a bit of yellowing on the leaves. Now the trouble is when you get yellowing on leaves, it depends what it looks like. And there's crossovers. You could easily say you've got some sort of deficiency in one or more of the nutrients that helps with chlorophyll. Yeah? Hence lack of green. That's one reason. But too much light will do it. But if it's too much light, it tends to hit the leaves that are nearest to the light, not the whole plant. And even with nutrient deficiencies, it depends whether they're mobile or immobile, on which bit of the plant they're going to hit. So sometimes yellowing leaves can be a right pain to diagnose accurately. I can make loads of guesses, but that doesn't necessarily help. Anyway, the 2, what were the latest new growths, this one's dumped most of its leaves. This is what I was on about. That's the sort of thing that was going on. And some of the leaves were far, far worse than that and got some pitting on them and promptly dumped themselves. This one wasn't quite so bad, and these 2 out the front are the latest 2 new growths. They seem to be recovering. They were yellower than that, and they're starting to get their green back. So it could have just been too much light. And this is what I'm getting at. Don't think that your new roots are going to come out when your new growths start. Not all plants do that. If you look at these growths, they're heading towards maturity. They are still growing. They haven't reached a terminal leaf yet. But it's only now that they're starting the flush of leaves. Oh, and we have another new growth. That wasn't there when I went on holiday. So don't always expect new roots with new growths. It doesn't always work like that. And that can catch you out. Because if your roots are not too clever, and you see some new growth and you repot it, which a lot of the books will tell you to do, yeah, and then your new roots don't come, you've just disturbed the few roots you had and upset them and probably lost some. So you now haven't got enough roots to support the plant, and you've got a long wait. If you think how long these growths took to get to there, and they're only just producing a new flush of roots, that's a long wait with a poor root system, and that probably would have restricted the growth on the new growths. Yeah, so go steady, try and I think the expression is get to know your plants. Now if it's a new plant, you probably have to take a guess at it. But if you get to know your plants, perhaps keep some notes. I mean, I will update my notes now that new roots come when the new growths are almost mature, and that can give me a clue for my timing when I come round to repot, so that I put the plant under as little stress as possible, because repotting is a stressful time for plants, you know, it just is. There's some weird noises going on around here today. Anyway, yeah, so that's that little set and a quick look at the actual plants. Right, now, in the growing season, water and feed well. That's it. And apply the appropriate amount of light, and don't overcook it. Yeah? You have to bear in mind, I would suggest every plant we've just looked at comes from an environment that is not a deciduous forest. Yeah, and I would say probably without exception they don't grow out in the open either. So they've got shade. Yeah, your tropical evergreen forests are not bright light. They're brighter than the UK because of their position relative to the sun. You know, sun's almost directly overhead, and it will filter through some of that leaf canopy, so they might even get a little burst of direct sun now and again, but they wouldn't be in it. You know, they wouldn't grow in it, they'd frazzle. All of these types like good humidity to keep them in their real comfort zone. You know, your tropical evergreen forests are constantly humid, but they do get that wet season and dry season. And the wet season tends to correspond to their maximum growth. So that's their growth period. And that's what, if you're in a summer like we get in the UK compared with the winter, the growing season is obviously spring through summer into autumn, because that's when the days are longest and the light's at its best. So that's when they will grow. Water and feed well. How much you feed and what with, I am not doing now. That's about a set of 8 videos on its own. And I've had enough of doing feed, quite honestly. Whatever you choose, but make sure they get fed and watered well. And for goodness sake with these types, don't leave them dry for any length of time when they're in active growth. You'll put a stall on them. They'll wonder what's going on, because it wouldn't naturally happen. But going into autumn, my day lengths are going to get shorter. The number of sunny days will reduce, and without the sun on my grow room, my temperature doesn't rise that much. So although it's not bad, I mean, I'm at 22, just over 22 degrees in here with no sun and no heat. That's perfectly adequate. And my humidity at the moment is 84. At that temperature, that's okay. When we go into tonight, that temperature will drop down to probably about 18. And that'll go up to above 90 because it's relative, and that's too high. So I'm starting to think about airing this place out a bit and getting that humidity lower for the nights. Low temperatures, incredibly high humidity will often lead to new growth rot, and even some of the older growths will succumb. They're not used to that level of humidity and getting chilled, so watch your temperatures. All of these like good temperatures. Yeah, I mean, they will go down to quite low minimums, providing they're not soaking wet, but not too cold. None of these like to get cold. Well, whether they like it or not, they're going to get it soon, because once we get to the winter, my heater is set to 12 degrees. Now, these would probably do better at sort of 14, 15, or even 16 at night. Well, they're not going to get it. And so far, none of them have worried about it. So what happens is if they start getting lower temperatures, they will slow their growth right down. And if a plant's not growing much, the last thing it needs is loads of water around the roots, because it can't use it, and your roots will rot. So certainly in the UK, These are allowed to dry in the winter, but not stay dry for any length of time. Now that's a form of rest, but it's imposed on me by where I live. And if I could choose not to do it, I would. But I've also got another set of Dendrobiums that are the true winter resters, and if they don't get the drop in temperature, they won't bloom. So it's an average in here. Some things are not in their comfort zone in the winter, and some are. They just have to lump it. That's how I work. And I've not lost a plant through cold yet, but they do slow right down. So I'm hoping in the next month that these two growths will finish growing and mature, because if they don't, they're going to slow down anyway as the night temperatures drop down and the day lengths shorten. And that's the time when you need to start watching your watering. You can keep these pretty wet in their high growing season with good temperatures and they'll do fine, but they won't like that when it starts getting cold. Cold and wet roots does not work. So yeah, what's your winter temperatures? The Phalaenopsis, they're the same. They like to stay warm. They don't like to get cold. But I haven't lost any in the winter yet. These all went through last winter okay. And quite honestly, this year they've grown better than they ever have. So maybe that extra chill in the winter, with the help from me by not keeping them soggy, actually gave them a bit of a boost. And when the actual better temperatures came and the longer days, they thought, right, let's get at it. And they have. So, you know, you've got to watch your plants. But all of these types, I would say, across the board, could be grown in the home with some extra help with the humidity. And go steady with plants near glass. I mean, obviously you can get nearer to your glass for better light as we go into autumn and the day lengths shorten and the sun becomes weak. But you got to watch your spring. That's when people get caught out more than any time, is they get used to where their plants are and they seem to be okay. And then suddenly the old sun is that little bit higher in the sky and it's got some power in it. You know, and you need to think about, are my plants now too close to the glass? Should they come back a bit? Should they stand behind another plant that doesn't mind the high light? So positioning is quite important. But all of these are perfectly capable of growing in the home. They will grow better with added humidity. And they're not high light lovers. None of these are high light plants. Yeah? They come from evergreen forests. They don't ever get that high intense light, as opposed to my resting dendrobiums that come from deciduous forests. And when all the leaves fall off, if the sun comes out, I'd suggest that's pretty bright light. But it's winter light, not summer light. And therein lies the subject for another video. So that's a look at what I call my continuous growers. And I'm sure I've missed a couple, but there's, you know, a fair selection there to look at. I've only got one antelope type and it's a hybrid. I've got on my wish list, I do have a couple of the antelope type species, but so far I've only ever come across seedlings. And generally speaking, I don't buy seedlings. I'm an impatient person. So I like to buy mature plants and you just, you know, they just don't come up. You just don't get them. So anyway, that's a look at the continuous growers and a chat about how I look after them in the UK, because you know, when you get into the temperate climates and the cooler areas, your winters are just different to where these plants come from. The days get really short and light levels drop right down, and so do temperatures. Now if they're growing in your home, you're not going to get the temperature drop. That's good, but you'll still get the short days. Yeah, and the shorter days will restrict their growth. And if they're not growing as fast, they don't need as much water and feed. Yeah, if a plant's not growing, feeding it is silly. All you're doing is accumulating that feed in the pot because it won't use it. It'll take a bit, but not a lot. So when they're in their slow period, you know, in the depths of winter, this is about a 2 month, maybe 2.5 month period, they don't get much feed at all. They get more flushes than feed that way round. But in the summer, they get more feed than flushes because they're growing actively and strongly. So you've just got to balance what you do to what your plant's doing. Your plant will slow up if your days get short. And when it slows up, its speed of growth slows down sometimes even stops. And if your plant's like that, don't keep your roots soggy, because they won't use it and you'll rot your roots. So that's a way of thinking about your plants. Is it actively growing? If it is, it needs some help. That's your bit, water and feed. Yeah. And if it isn't growing, it doesn't. But it might not necessarily need to go totally dry and stay like that for any length of time, because that probably would never happen in its natural environment. Because in its natural environment there would be much higher humidity than most of us certainly would have in our homes. So yeah, think about the goal. This is what their perfect world is. It's where they live. How close can I get? And if I can't get close for a period of the year, I'm going to need to adjust. Yeah. So it's at plant level mainly, but if you've got a large collection of dendrobiums or even other types of plants like I have, I still have to put them in sets because I can't treat each plant as an individual. I haven't got the time. Yeah. So that's set number 1. I'll move on to another set another day. Thanks for dropping by. Any questions that have been thrown up or bits you don't think I've covered, stick them in the comments. I'm always willing to deal with that. Usually the day after the video gets posted. I tend to do my comments first thing in the morning. So if you put a comment up in the middle of the morning, you probably won't get it dealt with till the next day. I don't drop in and out with my YouTube channel comments. I do them first thing with a couple of coffees while I'm waking up, basically. So it's a once a day exercise that's done, you know, in the time zone of the UK first thing in the morning. And this morning it was very early because the old police helicopter decided to do one of its "I'm going to circle over your house for an hour." So I got woken up at that wind's getting up at silly o'clock this morning. So I was at my comments when most people would have thought you should be in bed. Yeah, well I should have been, but I got woken up. See you next time. Thanks for dropping by. Questions, you know, warmly received. Otherwise I've got nothing to do in the mornings. See you next time.